I found out about my first Father's Day even before Elisa. Interested? Say yes. Thank you. Even before doctors, even before pregnancy tests. I'm going to tell you an absolutely true story. We had come from Atlanta, finished up at seminary, and I was working at a little church in Daytona called Southminster Presbyterian Church. And it's a small congregation. There might have been 40 people there. And this fella at the end of the service walks up to me. He looks me in the eye, and he says, "God is blessing you with a child." One of those prophecy things, I'm like, right. Where did you get that? Where did this guy come from? So, kind of blew that off. And, about 10 months later, here comes Kara. So it was kind of, so sometimes I look at those and I think, oh, this is kind of hokey. But sometimes you have to put a little bit of, I guess, trust in that. So I have to, Elisa, prepare yourself, because walking in this morning, somebody walked up to me and said, just in case, you may want to consider an ultrasound, just in case, after all these years. But, there was a time not long ago when you couldn't really see the pictures like the sonograms we have posted up there on the screens, and you couldn't tell gender. Gender's a big deal today. Hey, what's the gender of our child? And one of the techniques that they used back in the day to test for gender, they would have the mother would lay down, and a family friend or maybe a relative, they would get a string, right? And they would, see, you're nodding, and they would take like a wedding ring or sometimes a needle, and they would dangle that over the mother's stomach. Now, here's the thing. If it went in a circle, if it started to circle around, it meant you were going to have a girl. But if it swung back and forth, it meant you were going to have a boy. So, we've come a long, long way since that time. Now, what people have, this is true, absolutely true. I saw it on the internet. They have these things. They have these things called reveal parties. Have you ever been to a reveal party? One person. Two, been to a reveal. You know what a reveal party is? Because now they have this high-def 3D ultrasound that they can take these literal movies of your child in the womb, and so you gather together in a room, and they plug in the DVD, and you watch, and everybody gets to discover what the gender of the child is. So it's amazing what we're doing these days. Elisa, we did get a sonogram, but here's how she informed me. I used to have my office in the house when we were living in Daytona, and I was seated at my desk back in the Young Life days, and I'm working on something. She walks in with this giant case of diapers, and she plops it down on my desk and doesn't say a word. True story. I'm like, what's that for? I'm thinking, are you having an issue? But anyway, so it was her way of telling us that, we were going to have a baby. So, then on September 28th, 1989, Kara. Oh, 80, what? It's Father's Day. Give me a break. Just go with it. What? Tell me what you're trying to tell me. What? September 12th. Like I said, I got this date from you, by the way. So, okay, September 26th. I was off 2 days. Okay. Oh, gosh. This is what it's like to live in my family. How about you? So September 26th, 1989. Is the year right? Thank you. Okay, 1989. Kara was her name. Okay, just checking. 12 months later, I experienced my first Father's Day. It took me 30 years to experience my first Father's Day. But that's not the record. The record, how about try 90 years? 90 years is the record for the first Father's Day. In case you doubt me, let's open up our Bibles right now to Genesis. We're going to be looking at a very, very familiar story, for most of us anyway. Chapter 18 in Genesis, verses 1 through 15. I'm not going to read the whole scripture, but I'm going to give you a sense of what's happening here, and then we're going to look at that today. So it says, the Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre, and as he sat at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day, he looked up and he saw 3 men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran for the tent entrance to meet them, and they bowed to him and bowed to the ground. And he said, my Lord, if I find any favor with you, do not pass by your servant. Linger here a little while. And so for the next few verses, it's all about how he went out to get a meal and a big feast and to get some water to wash their feet, a whole lot of hospitality things that the Hebrew people would do to visitors like that. So now I want to skip down just a little bit. So verse 9. So these visitors, he doesn't know who they are at first. We find later they're messengers of God. We could call them angels. Then he said to them, where's your wife Sarah? Abraham said, they're in the tent. Then one said, I will surely return to you in due season. And your wife Sarah, here comes the prophecy, not at Southminster Presbyterian Church, but in this tent. Sarah shall have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent entrance behind him. Now, Abraham and Sarah were old in advanced age. It had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. Okay, translation, kind of too old to have a baby, right? That's what it, in Bible speak. So let's continue. So Sarah laughed. She's laughing. She hears this news. She's thinking to herself, after I have grown old and my husband is old, shall I have that pleasure? In other words, at 90 years old, I'm going to go through that whole thing and the pregnancy and the whole little babies and all of that kind of thing. So the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, shall I indeed bear a child now that I'm old? Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? At the time set, I will return to you in due season, and Sarah will have a son. May God bless the reading and the hearing of God's holy word. At first, when Sarah hears the story, she's overhearing the angels talking to Abraham. This is an interesting story, and it's actually the lectionary passage for today. And often when we read this story, it's all about Sarah. It's all about this woman who couldn't have a child. But really, she's not a character in it at first. It's really a conversation between the messengers and between Abraham. So this day, this Father's Day, we're not going to talk so much about Sarah. We're going to talk about Abraham because he was going to be the father. So Sarah hears the messengers and telling Abraham that, hey, all this thing is going to happen. And she just bursts out laughing, as the scripture says. And so the question is, wouldn't you, or maybe cry, I don't know what you do. Would you laugh or would you cry if you found out you had the sonogram and they said, wow, this thing is going to happen to you? And she thought, this is crazy. This is absurd that this would be happening to me. And then she blames it on Abraham. He's too old anyway, is what she says in the story. And it's kind of interesting. The author of Hebrews writes that Abraham was so old that he was as good as dead. Wow. It's in the Bible. I didn't write it. And I think that Hebrews passage has a point. We would say today a couple in their 90s doesn't have the physical ability to conceive a child. We would say that. Am I correct for the most part? Okay. So, but this isn't a story about what's possible through science. It's really a story about faith. So Abraham and Sarah, they didn't have any kind of ultrasound technology, but listen to this. As far as we can tell, they are the first couple in history to ever know the gender of the child before it's born, right? We say that's nothing today, but they were the very first ones. And that was because they had a sort of confident faith in the Lord, sort of that clarity of a spiritual ultrasound, something they can trust, a way God was revealing to them there's something more, something so beyond what you could conceive in your mind and even physically conceive. And so the messengers reveal Abraham and when he's going to experience his first Father's Day. And I think that's pretty cool. And they named the child what? Sin boldly. Isaac, right. Isaac, the name means laughter. They named the child Laughter, and that makes a little sense. And it was, I guess, a joy. It was going to be, they were going to be unlikely parents, but they were going to be parents after all those years. But it was also, if you'll remember in this story, it's a fulfillment of a promise that God had given to them. This was going to happen. And as the years click off and click off and click off, they just kind of say, oh, I guess that's not really going to happen. But it does. What seems impossible actually begins to happen. So for me, the way I think about this story, it's a story of apparent lifelessness to literally parents, right? Apparent lifelessness to parents. And now you go, okay, is the story believable? Is it really believable? What do you think? Just Bible stuff, right? They make up years, it doesn't really matter. Do you know, remember the old silent movie actor Charlie Chaplin? Guess how old he was when he became a father? 73. 90 doesn't seem that far-fetched to me. So don't just immediately say, oh, this is just a Bible story. I wanted to share a little bit today on this Father's Day. Again, I'm focusing a little bit on the father aspect in the story today. So I'm going to speak as a father. And I wanted to share my own story of apparent deadness or lifelessness that gets transformed. Maybe not exactly like the Abraham story, but in concept, I think it'll hold up. I hope my date's right on this. On Saturday night, November 19th, 2011, some of you were in this church at that time, some of you were not. The lives of everyone in our family changed. They changed forever, especially for our youngest daughter, Rachel. She had had a horrific traffic accident. And during that moment and those weeks that followed the accident, 100% of our concern, our shock, our worry, even horror as she fell into a coma, and all the issues of a respirator and feeding tubes and brain swelling, all of our focus was toward that trauma that she had sustained in the accident. And, using very similar technology as an ultrasound to find a baby, they used kind of a 3D scan to do an image of Rachel's brain. And the doctors looked into those images, and we had a different kind of a reveal. It wasn't a happy reveal. It was more of a sad reveal, because the images showed that a major traumatic brain injury, where many of the neurons in her brain had sheared. Now, as parents, and today I'm speaking as a father, okay, you know that in the moment of crisis that concerns any of our children, the little newborn baby that we held in our arms when they first entered our world, all we can consider, all of our most urgent, heartbreaking prayers for life, for healing, for a body that can still move, for a brain that will continue to direct functions. All of that is directed on the one, right? On the one. That, in my case, that little girl. And that's rightly so. And we're so thankful that for all of your prayers. We're thankful to God, the skill of the rescue and hospital staff, that our worst fears were not realized. But now looking back, after 6 years of recovery and a lot of accomplishments for Rachel, things have settled down in our lives, and we're no longer living in that state of constant crisis mode. Which means now, these years later, I have time to kind of step back a little bit and get a broader perspective of the impact of all of those traumatic events for that period of time in our lives. Now, what I've realized all these years later is that traumatic events like the one Rachel suffered doesn't just impact the one. And maybe the most critical impact is on the one. But now that I've thought about it, I've realized things like these traumas that happen in our lives, they affect the whole family. And in my case, they affected me as a father. And here's where I want to talk a little bit about Father's Day. You know, I don't know how it is for you, but in my mind, fathers are supposed to be that knight in shining armor, right? They come riding in on the white stallion to rescue and protect their princesses, right? That's what we're supposed to do. And I don't know if it's like that for all the father types here today, but for me, my inability to ride in on the white stallion and rescue Rachel was very difficult. In fact, it was so difficult that I think part of me began to be traumatized, maybe even began to lose a little bit of life. Because the one thing I thought I was supposed to do as a father, which is control that environment around my children and keep them safe, I couldn't do it. So many things changed for me also during that time of Rachel's accident. That feeling of, it wasn't failure. I'm not going to say I failed as a father, but I hope I'm conveying there's that sense of something I thought I was supposed to do, I couldn't do. I couldn't sustain her life. There was nothing other than prayer that I could do to sustain her life. And that creates a sense of barrenness in us, lifelessness, doesn't it? When we can't fix it, we can't do anything about it, we're stuck, immovable. I call it, my own sense of barrenness. But here's the good news, because this isn't a sad story. It's a very positive story, because God was seeing me in a very different way, much like God was seeing Sarah and Abraham. God could look inside of me with his own supernatural 3D ultrasound vision, and he saw something there, and he saw life, and he had a way of bringing life forward, up out of that despair. Just like Abraham, God was in control the whole time. He was in control of all the promises, all the futures. God could see all the blessings. They were on their way for Abraham. He knew it already. He knew it in advance. At first, I think Abraham and Sarah, that's why I relate to this story. They couldn't see it. They laughed. And I think in the midst of trauma, much like mine or maybe yours, you can't see it. It's so hard, isn't it? It's not apparent that sometimes God can bring us up out of raise us up, like the song, Terry. God could raise us up out of those situations. Some of them, the solutions seem so absurd that we won't even consider. We won't even grab hold of them, that we might even laugh at the thought of being a father or a mother at 90 years of age. But God sees us differently, right? In the same way that I began to see something new and the possibilities, at first I couldn't see where the blessings were going to come from. And I would come and I would give you sermons and messages, but I knew part of me inside was really hurt and maybe even a little dead, and part of me needed to find a way back into life. Not all of me, just a part. But it wasn't apparent to me, but it was apparent to my parent in heaven, right? That's the hope. Not only for Rachel, but for me. It took me 30 years to experience my first Father's Day. And now it's taken me a couple more, right, to experience this one more fully, the way I can experience it today. I think God can reveal life in all of us where there's some sense of barrenness. Possibilities and joy can come out of what seems unending sorrow and tragedy. And my question is this: have you ever felt like I did? Have you ever felt like you had a sense of lifelessness somewhere in you, a sense of barrenness? Maybe one little area in your life that you would long to have revived or have something brought out of it. That's the place for us where it may not be apparent, but God can see already how to bring life up out of those situations. So here's the question, and for you to ponder. Maybe you can imagine this right now. What absurd, laughter-producing blessing might God have for you? Think about what would just be an absurd, life-producing blessing that you would say there's no way that could happen. Yet, God can reveal that. God's waiting. And you know what I love about the story? The guy, the focus today is on Abraham. He's the father. He was 90 years old when this happened, which I often hear, I'm in later stages of my life. What more could God have for me? I couldn't possibly work at VBS, right? I'm too old. This story is wonderful. It says it doesn't matter how old you are, that God still can bring something new to life. And that's worth holding on to. Because as human beings, we get to choose how we view the world around us, right? We could choose to be like that mom with somebody dangling a little string over her tummy and hoping through some magic we find out what's going on. Or we could look through the lens of faith, right? Kind of like sonogram faith. We can look through that, ultrasound. We can look through those circumstances through that lens. And we begin to see life, maybe like Abraham and Sarah began to see. There's something better, and it's on its way. I think it's at times today, especially the past couple of weeks, what's going on politically, what's going on in violence in the country, what's going on with terrorism, just the whole gamut. If you look at all that, it's pretty easy to start just trusting what you see. And if you start just looking at it and things look awful, and many of us have been there in our own personal lives. Maybe you come to the end. I've come to the end of my personal resources. I guess that's what happened to me with Rachel. At one point, my personal resources thought I could go in and rescue her. I came to the end of that, and I had to look at it from a different perspective. Maybe we've come to the end of our way of understanding what's going on right now in our lives. And in those times, all you can see is the struggle, right? All you get to focus on is the trauma, the tragedy, the struggle, the hardship, maybe the disappointment, the darkness. It seems so thick, doesn't it? Like you're in that tunnel and you long for some light, but it's not coming. This can happen in communities too. Maybe this is a way to describe what's happening in our nation right now. We get such a dark view of the world. Maybe in the church too, right? We think, look what's happening. People don't want to come to church anymore. Look, it's Father's Day, and our worship service isn't as full as it was on Mother's Day. You ever consider that? We can be convinced with our eyes, or we can have faith that God can bring something brand new out of what seemed barren and dead. So I want to close today just offering you this encouragement to see through the eyes of faith the promises that God has for us. Stories like this, you can say it's just a Bible story, or you can say, it has something to say. It has a message for us. God can speak to us today. Maybe you were in a situation like I was in and our family was in, and you couldn't see it at the time, but now looking back, you see God's revealing those promises. That's what I want you to hold on to this Father's Day. It's tough being a father today. I know it's tough being a mom, but Mother's Day, we already did that. We're on Father's Day today, okay? It's tough. I think fathers get beat up today more than they ever have. So we need to have that vision and grab onto the promises like Abraham and Sarah at the idea that God might bless you in whatever age you are right now, bless you and enable you beyond your wildest laughable imagination. And that's the hope for today. Would you join me in prayer?